Hey guys, it's Alana, and welcome back to another episode of Seeing Other People. Together, we're navigating modern dating alongside experts and real-life daters who are sharing their stories. Don't have a date for tonight? No problem. Come learn, laugh, and maybe even cry along with us as we navigate the dating scene together. And we are here. Gabrielle Stone, welcome to Seeing Other People.
What's up, girl? Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
I am so excited to have you. I feel like I've followed so much of your journey from a distance, and there's so much I admire about you and what you did with everything you've been through. I feel like even from a young age, you were dealt kind of a pretty traumatic deck of cards. And some people would really let that get the best of them, but you've kind of turned it into this really empowering, inspiring story that has probably helped so many people. So thank you for doing that. And I'm curious,
Wow.
just kind of diving right in, why do you think that is? Like, what about you and your everything led that to happen?
I think I learned that lesson when I was very young. I grew up in Los Angeles with my mom and my dad. They were both in the industry at the time. My mom is an actress. She's best known for The Mom in E.T. and Cujo and The Howling. And my dad was a really well-known actor as well and was also a director. And we had a pretty normal life apart from the fact that they were in the industry. Like someone was always at my dance recitals and my soccer games. Like if one of them booked a job, the other one wouldn't book a job, which is like really hard to do in this industry. And we traveled a lot. If someone was on set for more than a week, the whole family went to go visit. So I grew up in this really like loving, wonderful household. And that kind of all came to a screeching halt when I was 6 years old. And I walked in and found my dad dead on the floor from a heart attack. And my mom was across the world in New Zealand shooting a movie. I was at home with him and my nanny. And she had to fly home, which is like a 24-hour travel day. She was home for a week, got all of the affairs in order, had his celebration of life, took care of me, did all the legal paperwork that has to be done, put me and her and my nanny back on a plane and flew back to New Zealand to finish the film. And that was kind of my first example of like when shit explodes in your life, how to pick up and keep fucking going. And it was a really great example for me, how to be a badass when trauma hits, because it hits, man, it hits.
To think about that happening to a 6-year-old, I don't remember much before I was 6. Like literally some of my first memories were when I was 6. And like to me,
Mhm.
the most traumatic thing as a 6-year-old was moving from one school district to the next, even though they were 10 minutes away.
Right,
I
right.
like it's so crazy the things that some people you and so many other people have, go through. And I guess you obviously don't realize at the time how it is going to impact you and shape you, but it absolutely does.
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, I can look back at my whole life and see how that first trauma and experience really shaped a lot of the things that I went through. That was really my first subconscious belief that became instilled in me, which was when I love someone, they die, which manifested in the fear of abandonment. So my whole life, I was struggling with this fear of abandonment. That was reinstilled when I was 18 and my high school sweetheart passed away in a car accident. And it was again, when I love someone, they die, fear of abandonment. So I, as an adult, started attracting all of these people subconsciously, obviously, that were going to play out this abandonment fear until I decided to like stop and look inward and be like, okay, this is a pattern. Like, why the fuck does this keep happening to me? And like, let's fix it. Because when there's a pattern that's going on in your life, I get DMs from my readers and my listeners all the time saying, I keep getting cheated on and like, why am I attracting these like assholes into my life and da 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 da. And it's like, do you deserve that? No, of course not. But if there's a pattern happening within your life, there is something within you, conscious or unconscious, that is attracting that to try and get you to heal something. And it's not until you heal that, then you can start attracting different stuff in the future. So it was a big, big learning lesson for me and a big journey that fear of abandonment took me on.
Yeah. It's funny, the concept of people saying like, well, why do I keep attracting this type of person over and over? I remember saying to somebody I was dating at one point, and this was kind of my traumatic relationship experience, but I was saying like, why are all these like things happening? Like, why are you making me feel this way? Why is this thing making me feel this way? And he's like, well, you have to realize a lot of like, there's a common denominator in all these situations and it's you. And it was like the
Mm,
meanest thing that anybody could ever say to me in that
yeah,
moment, but it was true because
right,
I was allowing people to treat me poorly. It doesn't mean that there was
right.
anything wrong with me. It doesn't mean that I was doing something bad. It's just the way that situations unfolded led me to allow and accept things that I never should have let happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so, it can be so frustrating when you're in the moment because it feels like all of these things are happening to you. And so many people don't want to take the accountability and be like, okay, but like, what's my part in this? And it's not until you do that to like look within yourself and be like, what is unhealed within me that's attracting all of this bullshit, that you can then start on that healing journey and rectify it to attract some better shit in the future.
Yeah, totally. I apologize, by the way, for just jumping right into like dump.
Oh
Let's
no,
talk.
please.
Let's trauma dump. Let's like get it all out there right from the get go.
Girl, I've been to town. I've gotten the t-shirt. Like I'm fucking no stranger from that. You know, like
Yep,
that's part of
it's a
life is
club.
like being able to heal from it, being able to like rehash it and talk about it because that means you've healed, you know? So it's
Exactly.
we trauma dump every day.
Exactly. Okay, let's get into the FML of it all.
Yes.
Obviously, there's the book Eat, Pray, FML. There's the podcast FML Talk. You also have a sequel, The Ridiculous Misadventures of a Single Girl.
Yes.
Where did this all begin?
Well, I like to say that Eat, Pray, FML kind of happened to me. I was working as an actress in LA, trying to like get my career going. Was not a writer by any means. I mean, I could bullshit the hell out of an English essay, but that was probably the extent of my writing career at the time. And I was married for almost 2 years and found out my husband was having an affair with a 19-year-old for 6 months, among a lot of other extramarital affairs. And when I discovered all of this, I filed for divorce and left. Shortly after that, I met this pretty well-known Hollywood actor and just fell madly in love with each other. Like it was 0 to 100, meet my family, I'm going to have babies with this person, like we're done. And he invited me on a month-long trip to Italy with him. 48 hours before we were getting on the plane, he told me he needed to go by himself and broke up with me. And this man broke my heart like my ex-husband never could have done. Like I was fucking devastated. And I was sitting on my bed at my mother's house because that's where you move when you're 28 and you get divorced. And just in a pool of tears and was like, all right, I can either stay at home heartbroken or I can go travel Europe for a month by myself. And my bag was already packed. So I took my backpack and I did 6 countries over the span of the month. And I wrote, Eat, Pray, Fuck My Life.
I have so many questions. I want to start by asking, A, how did you meet your ex-husband? And B, how did you find out about this affair?
So we met in a very weird way. And it's so funny when people ask me that because now that I look back on it, I'm like, that was kind of fucking stalkerish and like weird. but at the time I was like, oh, it's so cute. He thinks I'm so wonderful.
Oh my God,
So
tell me.
we ran into each other at a nightclub in Agora Hills, which if you're not familiar with the Los Angeles area, like there should not be nightclubs in Agora Hills. Like it's very like suburban area. So that was like the first fucking red flag. And he, caught my eye at the club and then we ended up like me and my girlfriends going over to the table he was at and he came up to me and he was like, don't think this is weird, but is your name Gabrielle? And I was like, yeah, that fucking weirdo. Like, yes.
Depends who's asking.
Right. And so we didn't go to the same school, but I had taken like a night class for 2 months. That was like
how
for
old are you?
Credit.
How old are you when you're meeting him?
This must have been like 24, 25, 24. And so he had recognized me from a night school class, and he was like, oh, I was in that night school class with you. And he was like, I remember when you lost your boyfriend, my high school sweetheart that passed, who was also in that night school class with me. He was like, I remember you posted something on MySpace, which gives you an idea of how fucking long ago this was.
God.
And I saved the thing you posted because it was so impactful to me. Hindsight, that's fucking weird. You know, like that's a little strange to like say to someone on the first time meeting them, but like for whatever reason,
also like at that time, during the MySpace time, like how is he saving this? Like he's not screenshotting it.
Right.
Like is he taking a picture on his flip phone and like referring back to it, and then sending it from his flip phone to the next phone to the next phone, or is he writing it down in his journal? Like,
or like copy and pasting it into his live journal, like fucking weird.
Right.
Okay, it was all weird. It was all red flags, and he ended up that night following me on Instagram, and then messaging me on Facebook and like all the apps. And so like I at the time was like, oh, he's really like interested in pursuing me and da da da. Now looking back, I'm like, that's fucking weird. Like pump your brakes, bro. But so we start dating, and we got engaged after 8 months. He proposed to me like really extravagant ring under a waterfall in Hawaii.
Oh wow. Were you ready?
And of course, well, I was, but like, no. Now, like, having been divorced and like married again, happily now, it's like, no, I was not ready at all. But it was very, you know, necessary for the journey that I was going on. Like, you can look at my life as a blueprint, and you're like, of course she had to go through all that shit, because look where she is now. And I would do it 10 times over. So we were engaged after 8 months, and then we spent 2 years being engaged so that we weren't like rushing the whole process. So yeah, that's how we met. And yeah, there were many red flags looking back on it that I rationalized, because that's what we do.
That is definitely what we do. We rationalize, we make excuses, we pretend we don't see things.
Yes.
So you get married.
We do.
And at some point you find out he's been having this affair.
Yes. And it's so interesting, because when I wrote the book, initially I was just going to be like, I was married, I got cheated on, I got divorced, and then all this shit happened. Because even so, the divorce and the cheating is like the first 2 chapters of the book. But I remember vividly, after I came home from my Europe trip, I was talking to one of my girlfriends, and she's like, no, Gabrielle, you have to write about that shit. The way you found out was like an episode of CSI. Like, please.
Oh my God, I need to
know. And I'm so glad I went back and wrote about it, because there's so many women that have been through, and men that have been through the same type of situation, and they resonate and relate to that so much. Because I turned into like, I missed my calling as a private detective. Like, I could have had a career.
It's never too late.
You know, I like start a website, start helping people find their sleuthing husbands. So it's written about and detailed in the book, but more or less we had been having problems for quite some time. I didn't know why. We were in therapy. I was working my ass off to like get us back to a good place. And he went on a work trip. I was in our office, and an email popped up on his computer that was just sitting there open. Like, I still till this day couldn't tell you his email password. And it was an Uber receipt going from where he was supposed to be to a different city. And that was kind of like all it took for me to be like, I'm about to go through the trash email, and just found like every receipt, and it just started unraveling like a fucking sweater.
How did you feel?
You know, I think because I had been so unhappy in my marriage for the past 6 to 7 months, I just didn't know why.
It was almost oh, this makes sense now.
I mean, it made sense. It was still really shocking. And I went through a lot of emotions of like betrayal and rage, and like, how could you do this and disrespect my body after like we just got married? But I wasn't in love with him. I loved him. But because I was not in love with him, it made it so I wasn't heartbroken. I was just like incredibly angry.
Did you know at the time that you weren't in love with him, or did it take meeting Javier to figure that out? And we'll get into that.
Yeah. No, it's a good question. And it did take meeting Javier. There's a moment in the book that I kind of like explain where that revelation happens. And when I fell in love with Javier, it was like, oh, this is what it was supposed to be like. I never had this with my ex-husband. And I came to the realization that I married my ex-husband because he was safe. So I loved my dad and he died. I loved my high school sweetheart and he died. So then I married someone I wasn't fully in love with because subconsciously that meant I was protecting myself from another person dying on me, which makes no sense to your conscious brain, but I wasn't walking down the aisle.
But it's what we do.
I'm not really in love with this man. It's fine. Let's go. Like all of this was deeply, deeply subconscious, but yeah. And I'm really grateful for that because I can't imagine going through all the stuff I did go through and being like fully in love with this person.
Yeah. I totally understand.
The heartbreak came after. It was like, let us serve this to you on a different platter, Gabrielle.
Okay. So fast forward, I think not that long, right?
Yeah.
You met Javier.
Yeah. It was like 2 weeks after I left my house that Javier came into the picture. And for context, I had known about the affair for probably like 2 weeks before leaving the house. So like I knew I was getting divorced for the past like month. Yeah. And that was on top of being fucking miserable in my marriage for 6 to 7 on top of that. But yes, it was rather quick.
How did this like explosive love story unfold?
You know, it's so funny because I had gone on 2 dates with Javier before I ever met my ex-husband. And he was the one person I had ever been successfully casual with. Like,
wow,
I always
that's
hated
so
that word,
interesting.
like being casual with someone, because like I was never capable of doing it except with him. So when he randomly like reached out to me, I was like, fuck yeah, I'll go to like hang out with this hot Latin guy and like, you know, we'll go to a club and dance and make out. Like, why not? I deserve that.
Did he know you had just left your ex-husband?
No, I don't even think he knew that I had gotten married. Like, it was very like, where have you been for the last 6 years? It's like, oh, fun story, bro. Obviously, like when we went and hung out, I like downloaded him on all of that. But I went to that first like hangout with him thinking like this will be a fun, casual, hot fling for me to like, because I was very set on being single for a long time after all of this. Spoiler alert, that did not happen. I don't have like a reasoning behind it. It just, both of us, it was like 0 to 100. Like even his mom and his friends and family were like, we've never seen him like this. Like, this is wild. It was like very like universally like, oh, of course I had to get divorced and get cheated on so that I could be free to meet this person because this is obviously my soulmate.
Yeah, like this was the story the whole time. It was already written. I just had to keep turning the pages.
Yeah. Totally. Like this is the happy ending that we all thought my marriage was supposed to be. Yeah.
Right. Until it wasn't.
Spoiler alert, it wasn't. No, it was not. I mean, obviously, big picture, the happy ending was me going on this journey by myself and writing this book that's now helping people all over the world. I mean, it literally shifted my entire career and purpose on this planet. And, you know, I'm a big believer in things happen for a reason. Sometimes you can't see them until you have a little bit more perspective. But even with how heartbroken I was when he told me he had to go by himself, because I was devastated. I knew and could see very clearly why it was happening. Like, this was the universe's clear way of making me go face all of the abandonment fears head on and being like, okay, you've never been okay by yourself. You've always needed a man to like feel safe and worthy. You've never, you know, really healed this fear of abandonment. So you're going to go across the world by yourself and figure your shit out. Have fun.
How scared were you? Like, even now, even with my quote unquote life together, like I'd be afraid to just go travel solo for a month, just like as a woman.
No, yeah, it was terrifying. I mean, the only like thing I knew about hostels is that there was a horror movie about them and people get brutally murdered in that. And like
Right.
we've all seen Taken. So yeah, I was fucking terrified. But um, I think once I took the leap and decided that I was going to go, and it really did help that I only had 2 days to wrap my head around that, to like not try and invite a girlfriend or like figure out plan B.
Hmm.
It was really like designed in the perfect way, because solo travel is so special. Like I've done 2 big solo trips now. My first was Europe in the Eat Pray FML trip, and then my second one's written about in the sequel, and that one was by choice. Um, and solo travel really gives you so many gifts. Like I rediscovered myself in a whole new way. I realized how fucking capable I am, how okay I am by myself, how much I actually like to be by myself. It completely changed my life. I always urge people to like take the leap and do a solo trip at one point in your life.
I think that's so important, learning to be okay with yourself. And I mean, this whole concept of learning to love yourself, it's really difficult to love yourself. Like we're
Yeah.
our own worst enemies, we're our own biggest critics. We're stuck with us, though, for our entire lives. And it can be even more difficult, like after a breakup or after, I mean, you had like 2 back-to-back kind of like heartbreaks in a row. And I feel like what happens in most situations when someone does get broken up with is they question themselves and they doubt themselves and they're like, well, what did I do to deserve this? Like, what's wrong with me? And like, we internalize that as like we did something wrong, or like there is something about us that is wrong. But
Hmm.
if you take the time to really get to know yourself and to embrace who you are, you can actually turn that around and say, like, okay, like I know who I am and what I deserve and what I want. And like, you know what? It's okay that that ended. And that doesn't mean that there's something wrong with me. That doesn't mean that I'm broken. That just wasn't for me for the long term. And something else
Yeah.
is. But in the meantime, I can go be with myself.
Yeah. And like, what are the reasons why this had to happen the way that it did? Like, I can look back at the deaths in my life, the divorces, the heartbreaks, like all the trauma that I've been through, and be like, okay, I can see the positives out of every single one of those situations. I can see how this losing this person shaped me into the person I am today and what lessons that taught me. Doesn't mean that it was like great to experience or that we like
Right.
wouldn't change it if we could. But like if you look like a detective in your life, you can always find the things that you can take away from, shitty situations. When people are like, how did you ever trust again? Like, I never thought, like, I don't want to be in another relationship. And I'm like, if there was ever a time for me to like close my heart off and be like, later, we're done, like, no entry, sorry, goodbye, it would have been after, I finding out my husband was cheating on me.
Right.
If I have done that, I would have never been open to meeting Javier. I wouldn't have fallen in love. I wouldn't have gotten my heart broken, which I can assure you up until that point had not happened. And I think that we all need to go through that at some point. I wouldn't have gone on this life changing trip, healed a bunch of shit within myself, rediscovered myself as a human, and have the career that I have now, being able to help so many people and was able to put this book out. It all happened for such a big reason. And you just have to be able to look at what those reasons are and decide to like use them as ammo to move forward.
Yeah. It's a lot easier to look back and have this hindsight and say this now. How did you make sense of everything day to day when you were in Europe, when this was so fresh and you're trying to understand like why and how and what now?
I met myself exactly where I was every single day. So there were days where I just wanted to sit wherever I was staying and cry and write, because I was obviously like, I decided I was going to write this book the day that I left. So I was writing a lot, which was very therapeutic for me. So there were days where I would be in, the hostel or the room that I was staying in and cry for like hours on end and write for hours on end. And there were days where I wanted to go out and party and get drunk and meet people. And I would do that. I would really authentically decide to meet myself wherever I was each day and allow that to be okay and not judge myself for that.
I love that. And I think that is so important. And I love that you were open with your like with your whole world about that too. Like you were openly sharing that. And I think that that's so incredible because so many people don't see that side of other people's lives, and that's where we get caught up in thinking, well, everyone else is happy all the time, and like everyone else is
Yeah,
like fine and doing great, and like that is literally not true at all. And
at
that's something that
all.
i
Yeah.
i find myself like trying to encourage myself to do. I mean, even this past week, I have a huge fear of public speaking, and I got this incredible opportunity to speak on stage at this huge conference. And I was like, okay, I don't want to just like pretend I showed up to this and it was awesome and I had a great time, when like the 72 hours leading up to it, I was literally having a mental breakdown and
Right.
panic attack every single day, freaking out about it. So instead,
Yeah.
I like opened up to the seeing other people audience on Instagram and was like, guys, I'm freaking out. Like, I don't know how to do this. Like, I asked them for advice. And then I decided, even like, because I encourage people, like, if you're feeling really nervous for a date or you're feeling really anxious, like, you can tell the person, like, yeah, I'm like really nervous right now. And that just humanizes you. So I was on the train heading to this conference yesterday, and I decided, like, you know what? Instead of pretending like I got this, why don't I actually share with the audience that I have a fear of public speaking?
I love
Because my
that.
whole point was to talk about like human connection and how we can use social media and use our platforms to do that. And I was like, I could go up here right now and act like I got this and like I love doing this, but that wouldn't be real. What's
Yeah.
real is that I'm
I
terrified to be here.
yeah, I love that so much, and I think it's so important. And I wish more, whatever you, I hate the fucking word influencers, but like influential
Yeah.
people on social media would do that more often. When I left on my Europe trip, I thought I was just gonna like delete the apps off my phone and just like take a break and be with myself and not show up on social media. And I posted a picture at the airport as like my kind of like final post, if you will, with my backpack, and kind of like announced my divorce and was like saying what's actually going on. And now I'm like going on this Europe trip by myself and da 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 da. And for the 2 hours before I boarded the plane, I got hundreds and hundreds of messages about, this gave me hope. This was so inspiring. Thank you for being so real. Please keep sharing your journey. So because of that, I was like, okay, I'm gonna like continue to share
Yeah.
throughout this process, but in an authentic way. So there are posts that are like, I am not mentally okay. I'm fucking dying today. Like, this is horrible. Like, really in my feels. And then there's posts where I'm out partying and like living it up and having the best time of my life. So I've continued since that to really hold true to that. And I think that's why I've built the type of community that I have with my readers and my
Yeah.
podcast listeners, because like there are times, I mean, even like this last week I was posting to like some of the close friends group that I have on my Patreon, and was like, I'm like, I'll see you guys on Monday. Like, I need to check out, my mental health is not okay, pregnancy hormones are fucking real. Like, I need to like do a gypsy fade for a while, guys. And it's so important, because if you're always just looking at this highlight reel of people's lives, it's like, the amount of like, well, why isn't my life like that? And why am I
Right.
not that happy? No one's that fucking happy. No one's that fucking
No,
happy all the time.
ever. It's not
Like,
true.
social
It's
media
not
is
real.
so fucking toxic in that way. And I'm so glad that I ended up doing that, because it did two things. It set the precedent for people knowing that I'm always going to be authentic and show up in a real way on my social media. And it allowed the whole trip to be documented. So now whenever people go and read the book, like every couple days, I'll see all of my Europe photos getting liked in a row.
Love. It's
And
like
I'm
a
like, oh,
picture book with
they're
it.
reading the book
Yeah.
and following along. So it makes it like
It's
really
so
fun in that
cool.
aspect too.
Were you nervous at all when writing this book, when putting all of this content out there on social media, that future people that you were going to meet and date maybe wouldn't want to be with you because of that? It's almost like, I hate the word baggage, but you're like putting all your baggage out there for the world to see. Like, was
Totally.
that nerve-wracking at all? Because even normal people who don't go through divorce and get cheated on and have these experiences, like, I know so many people are so afraid to open up to someone new about their past relationships just because they're afraid of being judged. And
Yeah.
obviously you did this in a very public way.
It's such a good question. And I don't know if I've ever been asked it in that context.
Yes.
I was nervous. I know you're like, yes, after the 200 plus interviews she's done. I was nervous about potentially being like slut shamed for certain things in the book. My mom, when she read the first draft, was like, are you sure you don't want to change your name or take out one of the men that you sleep with? And I was like, no, Mom, like this has to be like fully like real and raw and honest, and people are going to relate. So I had some nerves about that. I mean, they weren't bad enough nerves to where I wasn't going to release the book. Obviously, it was, you know, I knew that this was like something that needed to be done. But I don't know if I ever sat there and was like, oh God, this is going to make men like run the other fucking way. I've had that thought now, like, oh my God, if I ever like was not in the relationship that I'm in now, like, can you imagine me trying to go date and sitting down across the table from someone and being like, so tell me about your story. And I'm like, well, have you Googled me? Because like, you've probably gone down a fucking wormhole if you have. So that would be a lot. Thankfully, the relationship that I'm in now, happily married, and we have a baby on the way. He actually was the first person to read Eat, Pray, FML in its like raw vomit draft form. And we were like just building a friendship at the time, or so I thought.
How did you meet?
It's written about in the sequel. So our whole relationship was like on again, off again. And like he came into my life when I was super fucked up and not healed. Which is why it's so sweet to see like my followers kind of experience like the engagement and the wedding and the baby with us, because they all feel like they know him from reading the sequel. Because it was not an easy road to get to the happily ever after. I will tell you that. Like, you might know the ending, but I guarantee you, like, the shocking shit that happens to get there is ridiculous. And we met 10 years ago on a film set. We were acting in a film together, and he was with his partner at the time. I was with my college sweetheart, and we were like really connected as like friends, but that was it. And we just like stayed connected on Facebook, and it was like, congratulations on the birth of your child, congratulations on your wedding, like shit like that. And then he got divorced, I got divorced, and we like randomly ran into each other when I came back from my Europe trip. But so he was reading this book and really had like a fucking outline and play-by-play of all my trauma, and like was like, okay, so these are her triggers, these are what we don't fuck with, like, you know. And so it was a wild experience for him to kind of like have this roadmap into the woman that he was courting. But like, if I ever had to go back into the dating world now, like I can't even imagine. Like, there's too much on the internet at this point that like people would just deep dive and be like, whoa.
Do you think there was something different with him? Was it that like he was different, or was it that now you were different that made it work versus your past relationships?
I think both. I think he's just, he's an impeccable human. And like so many people would attest to that, not just because I love him. And I was now able to attract people who were not going to abandon me because I went and fixed my shit. So both.
Yeah. I think that's so important, because it really shows like how important timing is, how important doing like self-work is, and growing and just taking the time to figure your shit out. Because I mean, there are relationships that I was in the past where I at the time was like, oh, like this is it, like this has to be my person. Like, first of all, like we weren't even in a real relationship. I was not I wasn't being treated well. Like this person did not have their life together. I didn't have my life together. And like, it never would have worked. And like, even now with Jake, my fiance, we always say like, had we met even 6 months before, we probably wouldn't be together now because we weren't ready for each other.
Yeah. No, and that's so true. I've done podcast episodes with my husband, and people have asked, about the second book, and was it difficult? Because there's stuff. Eat, Pray, FML was like, there's nothing in that book that I'm embarrassed about or ashamed about. Like, yes, I have a one night stand. Like, so sue me. I learned some shit from it. Whatever. But there's stuff in the sequel that like I really like deeply feel bad about, because I was working through a lot of shit, and like it wasn't like he came into my life and I was like, oh great, knight in shining armor, let's ride off into the sunset.
Right.
I fought that healthy love for a very long time. And it, having to go back and relive all that to write it in an authentic way was really difficult.
For sure.
I'll never forget like being in our house and like walking in and being like, I need you to sit down and read this book so you can tell me if there's anything that like you're uncomfortable with. And like him fucking pacing through our house, reading about, me with other people and like all of this stuff that like he knew about, like he knew about all of the things that had happened, but reading it in like descriptive detail is obviously very different.
It's like
So
we
really
know
difficult.
that everyone has a past. Like we know the person we're dating has a past and has been with people before, but like most 99.999% of the world doesn't have to read about it in very vivid detail.
Graphic detail. Yeah.
And like get all of your inner thoughts.
Totally. Yeah. And it was, and reading about himself, that of situations he was involved in, and like, he's reading about an ex that like he knows, like it was very complicated and very tricky. And we made it through that. And, when we look back on it and reflect on it, we're like, we wouldn't be the couple that we are now today in this healthy relationship if we wouldn't have done the back and forth and gone through all the bullshit that we did. We had to go through all of that to be the people in the relationship that we are now. So it all was worth it.
There's one concept that I've heard you talk about that I love, that I really want you to share. And that is this concept of the thought onion.
Yeah.
Tell everyone what it is, because I just think it's so helpful.
Yeah, the thought onion is my kind of technique of looking at your thoughts and your reactions and your feelings and figuring out what's underneath them and what's causing them and really what's at the core of them, so that you can begin to heal and have different thoughts or feelings or reactions in the future. So you look at it like an onion. I always said I was going to change the name of this because when I came up with it in Europe, I was like, this is so stupid. It's like too on the nose. Perfect. And then I just kept writing it. I was like, well, it's not changing, whatever. So you look at it like an onion. The first layer is the superficial thought. And that's kind of your first like knee-jerk reaction when something happens. And it's oftentimes superficial because it's our conscious brain having that immediate knee-jerk reaction. And when you take a step back and peel that layer back, you get to the authentic thought. And that's kind of the fear or ouch spot that kind of is triggered, that's bringing up that superficial thought in the first place. So like, what's a little bit deeper? Where is that coming from? Like, what emotion is prompting that? And then when you take a step back and peel that back, you get to the subconscious thought. And that's where the real like meat and potatoes is, because those are like usually long stemming traumas or subconscious beliefs or like things that have been with you for some fucking a long time. And when you can figure out what the subconscious thought is, you can start to redirect that, heal that, be aware of that, to then have different thoughts or reactions in the future.
I'm about to jump out of my skin because hearing you explain it again, I think I may have just uncovered something. Back to my fear of public speaking.
Share.
For the last week, I've been trying to like reason with myself, being like, okay, every time you do a public speaking thing, you freak out for like a week before, and then it happens. It goes great. You're like on a high after. You're like, okay, I can do this again. And then the next time you sign up to do something like this, you panic. Mm-hmm. And the same thing happens again and again. And every time it goes fine. So what is the problem? So the last few days I was trying to reason with myself, being like, okay, Alana, why do you feel this anxious about it? I don't know, because it's scary. Why is it scary? Because it is. Like, well, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? Nothing.
Mm.
I just realized when I was in high school, I gave a presentation to my chem class, and I got up
Mm-hmm.
there in front of the classroom and I completely froze, burst out laughing, then started hysterically crying, and then ran out of the room.
Yep.
And I think that is why, like, I just remembered this, and that might be why I'm afraid of it.
Oh, totally. So it's so interesting that you bring this up because I too have a fear of public speaking. I get like oddly nervous. My body does like weird things, which when I was going into audition as an actress, like is like so detrimental to like trying to go in and do a good job. And I was like, what the fuck is this about? And when I started tracing it back, when I lost my high school sweetheart, I went and spoke at his funeral. And when I got up to speak in front of everyone, my whole fucking body shut down. My throat closed up. I could barely get the words out through my tears. And it was a sense memory that whenever I get up in front of an audience now or in a high pressure situation, I went straight back to that moment.
Wow.
And people that are listening, if they're like, okay, cool, I've gone back, like I get where that moment was, how do I then fix it? This is getting into some more like, you know, we've done like episodes of this on my podcast, but it's called going back to your little child and doing work with them. So like, how old were you when you went to your chem class and like that happened? What age were you?
Probably like 14.
Okay. So when you get quiet with yourself, you go back and in your mind's eye, you envision that you're talking to your 14-year-old Alana and you're like, look, dude,
okay.
I know that this was traumatic. I know that this sucked and was really embarrassing, but like it was a learning lesson and we don't have to live like that anymore. And you're okay. And I support you and I've got your back anytime we go up there so we can let this go and it's going to be okay. And da, 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 da. And you literally talk yourself through that. So like if you were 6 years old at your trauma, you go back and talk to your 6-year-old self.
I really wish we had this conversation a week ago. But now, you know what? Like, this is so good to talk about at any point because now maybe I can actually like do that work with little Alana. And then next time, I'm curious. I'm actually very curious to see what happens next time. If it's,
you'll have to let me know. I need an update.
Well, okay, wow. Thought Onion doing all the work today. I love it.
Love it.
Final question for you, and this is my favorite question to ask. What is the best piece of dating or relationship advice you've ever received or have to give?
It would be from my mom, and it would be keep your heart open. And again, it's circling back to being scared to take that leap and get hurt again and be in a relationship. And regardless of what happens and what the outcome is, if you put yourself out there and you take that chance, you're either going to end up wildly in love and super happy or devastated and heartbroken. But either of those outcomes is going to shape you and teach you something to become the better version of yourself that's then going to attract whatever you do want into your life. So the heartbreak is worth it. The happiness is worth it. Like, keep your heart open.
I love that so much, and I couldn't agree more. Gabrielle, thank you so much for being here. Where can everybody find you, your podcast, the books, and anything else you want them to know about?
You're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me. The books are exclusively on Amazon. The first is Eat, Pray, FML. The sequel is The Ridiculous Misadventures of a Single Girl. You can also get both of them signed by me on my website, which is eatprayfml.com. I also have a journal called Fuck Off, I'm Healing, which is like a step-by-step guide to really walk you through unraveling some of the trauma and bullshit that you go through in your life. Not only heartbreak related, like every healing aspect, the thought onions in there, some other techniques are in there. And it prompts you to really like ask some good questions on your healing journey. And then the podcast is FML Talk. It airs every Wednesday. And I'm on Instagram at Gabrielle Stone.
Amazing. I will have all of that linked in the show notes so you guys can find it. This has been so, so incredible. Thank you again so much for being here. And to everyone who tuned in, thank you guys for listening. Love you all. And I'll talk to you next time. Thanks for listening, daters. I hope today's episode